Welcome to Sipping Sense, Sips and Swigs, a monthly edutainment podcast designed to introduce you to intriguing and unique people and innovations in the wine and food world. My name is Stephanie Browne, author of Sipping Sense, Uncorking the Flavors of Wine, Entertaining, and Healthy Cooking. And today I have the pleasure of speaking with Adrian Miller. Adrian is an acclaimed food historian, a recovery attorney, a policy analyst, two-time James Beard Award-winning author whose work explores the rich and often overlooked stories behind American food culture. A former White House advisor to President Bill Clinton, Adrian has become one of the nation's leading voices on the history of African American cuisine, barbecue, and the culinary traditions that have shaped the American table. He is the author of the award-winning books Soul Food, The Surprising Story of an American Cuisine, One Plate at a Time, Black Smoke, African Americans and the United States of Barbecue, The President's Kitchen Cabinet, the story of the African Americans who have fed our first families, and his newest release, Cooking to the President's Taste, Asian Heritage Chefs in White House History. His books have earned multiple James Beard Foundation Awards for reference, history, and scholarship. The President's Kitchen Cabinet was also nominated for an NAACP Image Award for outstanding literary work. A certified barbecue competition judge, board member of the Southern Foodways Alliance, and a passionate culinary storyteller, Adrian continues to uncover the people, the culture, and traditions that have shaped American cuisine from his home in Denver, Colorado. So welcome, Adrian, and thank you for dropping by Sips and Swigs.
No, thank you, Stephanie, for that wonderful introduction and good to be with you. I know that after you said all that and you told people I was from Denver, I probably lost all street cred, but I
Well,
want to
not
win it
really,
back.
not really. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about why you haven't lost any street cred.
Okay.
Yes, good. But it is a lot going on in that bio. You have done a lot of things and you are, into 4 books. Probably we got to go all the way back because we got to figure out you graduated from Stanford, right? Did I get
Y-
that right?
yes.
And you went on to land a job with President Clinton. Okay, I have to figure out how did that come about?
Yeah. So after Stanford, I went to law school. So I went to Georgetown University Law Center in DC. And after graduating there, I was practicing law in Denver. Not to disparage anybody who listens to your podcast who is an attorney or has attorneys in their family or their social network. I just hated the practice of law. It got to the point where I was singing spirituals in my office. And just to show you how rough law firm life is, when I would start singing, white people would join in. That's how bad it was. So I was looking to do something else. And a friend of mine from Georgetown Law School called me out of the blue and just said, "Hey, Adrian, I'm working in the Clinton White House. We're looking to do a quick hire. Can you recommend somebody?" I asked her, "Well, tell me what you're working on." And she was working on something called the President's Initiative for One America, which was an outgrowth of President Clinton's initiative on race. And the wild idea behind the initiative on race, ready for this? If we just talked to one another and listened, we might realize we have a lot more in common than what supposedly divides us. I know, wild.
Hey,
Yeah. So when my friend wanted me to tap somebody for that, I just did the same thing that Dick Cheney did when George W. Bush asked him to find a vice president. I was the head of the search committee, and my name was the only one put on the list. So that's how I got that job.
wow. And then while you were there, somehow or another, you got the bug around food and the history of food as it related to the White House. So you tell a story in one of your prefaces about when you got the bug. So tell the audience around kind of when that bug kind of happened.
Yeah. So the book, I mean, I had always liked food, cooked it a little bit. I was blessed to grow up with two parents who loved to cook. My mom's from Chattanooga, Tennessee. My dad's from Helena, Arkansas. So we grew up with Southern food, soul food. So after the White House, I was in DC a lot longer than I expected and watching way too much daytime television. I'm embarrassed to tell you the shows that I was watching. Jerry.
Yes, okay. Mr.
So,
Springer.
yep, Springer, Ricky Lake, Sally, Jesse, Raphael, Montel. It was bad. So, in the depth of my depravity, I said, I should read something. So, I went to a local bookstore and I found this book on the history of Southern food written by this guy named John Edgerton in the late 80s. I'm reading it in 2001. And he wrote that the tribute to Black achievement in American cooking has yet to be written. So, that's what starts the journey. And so, I accepted that challenge, having no experience at all except for eating this food. And then about a decade after reading that, this is when I started writing my book on the history of soul food. So I never even really met the challenge that Mr. Edgerton wrote because it was such a massive topic that I said, well, let me just write first about soul food and just see how that goes. And so my first book, I created a representative soul food meal. I write a chapter about every part of the meal and I explain what it is, how it gets on the soul food plate, what it means for the culture. And then most of the chapters have recipes, usually a traditional, a health conscious, and then a fancy one in case you want to show off as a cook. So yeah, that's how it came together.
Well, my book is very similar. Where you talk about legacy, you talk about my legacy around how food and wine came to be in my life. And then you walk into a recipe that either came from someone in your family or it was something that inspired you along the way. Most of my recipes are all about how I put food and wine together because I want to make sure that's why you would pick up the book. But something happened along the way in that journey around soul food. It says you visited 150 restaurants and 35 cities. And
Yeah.
so I'm going like, how many ways can you eat greens? That's the first thing that came to my mind. So talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. So when I started researching, not knowing much except just having some cultural contact with it, because I grew up in that tradition and knowing a little bit, I just started grabbing everything I could on Black food traditions. So I read 3,500 oral histories of formerly enslaved people and outlined every reference to food. I read 500 cookbooks, half authored by African Americans, because I wanted to put Black food traditions in a larger culinary context. Read thousands of newspaper and magazine articles, talked to hundreds of people. And then I felt it really do the research for, to really do this. And it was, somebody had to do it. I had to eat my way through the country. So that's when I did the 150 restaurants, 35 cities in 15 states. And actually, there are a ton of ways to eat greens because what I found out is I explored the regional differences. So, you go to a place like Georgia, you're going to get collards, Alabama, you're going to get collards. But if you go upper South, a place like Tennessee, you're going to get turnip greens. You might even get mustard greens. If you go to Maryland, you're going to get kale. If you go to North Carolina, you're going to get something they call creasy greens. And so, having grown up outside of the South and lived most of my life outside the South, I did not have a deep appreciation for these regional differences in greens, black eyed peas, which are actually cow peas or field peas. So, I had purple hull peas, lady pink eyes. I didn't know about all of these. Even the ways that people make cornbread, like some places you're going to get a nice wedge, some you're going to get a square, some are going to give you hot water cornbread that almost as more like a pancake. Some are going to give you muffins. Some are going to give you corn sticks. So all of that diversity, I just loved.
Yeah, no, until you just actually articulated it the way I probably didn't stop and think about all the different ways friends have served me all of those.
Hmm.
And think about like what is the history behind why they're serving it that way and I serve it another way. And I came from the Midwest where you actually combined all of the greens in the pot at the same
Yeah,
time.
right.
So that, I think about, okay, so where did that actually come from? Now that I think about it. So I'm going to have to figure out how to ask somebody who had an elder that might have known why that is.
Oh, that's definitely a key part of the story. So, especially during the Great Migration, as people leave the South, depending on when they left, it was hard to get some of the stuff they grew up with in these other places. So, they had to either adapt or change. So, let's just say you were somebody used to mustard greens. It was hard to get mustard greens outside the South because they were delicate and they just didn't last long on the truck or the train ride out. But collard greens are sturdier and they could make that ride out. So that's why collard greens are the dominant one across the country because they were just ready made for the industrial food system at the time of the Great Migration. So you get a lot of stories of adaptation, But then if something becomes available, people remember that taste of home and they try to do that. A lot of it also has to deal with who are their neighbors, because there are people who eat greens in other countries and that may reinforce what they do. So it's really fascinating the way that these things come together. So it's about movement, it's about tradition, it's about exposure to other cultures, but a lot of it is just what did that food system make available in the place that they were.
Yeah, it was interesting when you talked about eating at all those different restaurants in all those different cities. The first thing that came to my mind was greens. I don't know why, but it did. Maybe because we eat now growing up, we grew up cooking greens and we boiled them till they were little or nothing. Now we actually just could saute them, or we might actually put them in a salad. And I never had greens in a salad when I was growing up. So I think adaptation comes from not just cultures, but also comes from the actual food itself. Lots has changed there, especially when you're thinking about healthy cooking. Okay, so now we're on the kitchen cabinet. I love the name of that book. And you are now researching African Americans who fed presidents. Now, I know there have been plenty, obviously, but maybe what president or what kitchen surprised you the most?
I would say that it was President Dwight D. Eisenhower, because I would say he was the most, if you just make up a word, the cookingest president that we ever had. So he would actually go up on the rooftop of the White House and grill steaks. So people walking down Pennsylvania Avenue would see smoke coming out of the White House, and they're just like, "Well, hey, what's going on?" It was just the president up there cooking. But he was known for this beef vegetable stew that he would make, and it was actually his black valet, a guy named John Money, who often did a lot of the prep work for that. Another person that I had heard about but didn't know much about was Zephyr Wright, who was Lyndon Johnson's cook. Now, being a Southerner from Texas, not surprised that he had a black cook, but the way her personality, the way she shaped history, because he would use her Jim Crow experiences in the South to mobilize support for the 1964 Civil Rights Act. I just thought that was really, really impressive. Every president of the United States has had an African American cook for them in some capacity, either in the basement kitchen, when they traveled on train, presidential yacht, or by Air Force One. Or sometimes presidents would go to a place just on vacation and a local family would loan their black cook to the president just as a way of ingratiating themselves.
When you just said the valet was doing the prep work, I'm like, the valet's supposed to be bringing the shoes or doing the setup of their wardrobe. So that really was surprising. And then you also mentioned them being tapped for diplomacy or what might be going on in politics. So it wasn't just they were part of kitchen help or the head chefs or anything like that. Well, actually, were they the head chefs?
Yeah, so a lot of people get tripped up on this understandably because ever since Jacqueline Kennedy, the person running the White House kitchen has been called the White House executive chef.
Mhm.
So technically, there's never been an African American in that role. But
Okay.
before that, they were just called the head cook or the White House cook or the first cook. And we've had several black people in those roles, and several black women were in those roles.
So when you talked about the Asian chefs, a lot of that book was really about chefing on the ships.
Right.
Honestly, I guess I never thought of our presidents having their own yachts because I've always thought about that as being the English people because that's what you read a lot about or heard a lot about. So the fact that there were multiple ships and multiple chefs and many of them were Asian, I thought was the coolest thing since sliced bread.
Yeah. So you are vibing with Jimmy Carter. So the presidents have had a yacht ever since Abraham Lincoln, but it was Jimmy Carter who got rid of it for just the reasons you said. It just seemed he thought it was a waste of money. He just didn't think that was part of the American vibe. So he sold it. Members of Congress were hot because they would use that when the president wasn't using it, they would use it and they loved to take their, lobbyists and family out on the Potomac. And in fact, they were so mad about it that when Reagan came in, they actually tried to get him to buy it back. And he's like, nah, I'm not doing that.
And the most recent one with the Asian chefs, I was surprised about the recipes too. Now, you partnered with someone on those recipes. What made you do that? What made you think that you needed to do that since you had so much experience in researching all the right things?
Well, because I knew that this one was going to be more of a cookbook, because all of my other books are more history books with recipes, but this was going to be more of a cookbook. And I mean, I got skills, but I don't have the culinary chops to test recipes that are 100 years old and make them contemporary. I reached out to my friend, and I really thought it was important to have an Asian perspective on this. My friend is Chinese American. And so I really thought that that perspective was really important. And she has the culinary chops because she went to culinary school to pull it off and just make sure the recipes were in good shape.
Okay, good, good. Now, do you have a favorite recipe in that book?
Well, the double chocolate chip recipe is pretty slamming. And there is a recipe, well, there's a series of recipes for a state dinner created by Edward Lee, who is the son of Korean immigrants, born in Brooklyn, moved to Louisville, Kentucky, and ran a restaurant. So he's got this fusion Korean Southern thing. He created the state dinner for the president of South Korea in 2023. So we have that entire meal there. So he's got things like butter bean grits, there's a braised short rib. I think that's probably my favorite overall in that book.
And in that book, you have pictures of some of the state dinners. Some of them were pretty simple, and even how they described the food was pretty rural, I would say. When you think about how we eat today and how lavish menus are today and how lavish you can have a high-end dinner, even though it was the White House, the early days were pretty not as lavish as you would have thought they were. Right? Okay, not very many people get a chance to say I'm a James Beard Award winner. Tell me how the first book actually got you there, and how did you find out about that? Because that seems like the cool thing.
So when I first found out about the James Beard Awards, I just knew about the restaurant and chefs. So it wasn't even on my radar screen because I was writing books. And then, but the James Beard Awards, they have a restaurant and chef category, and then they have a media category. So they do books, articles, podcasts, all kinds of stuff, film, TV. So you can nominate yourself, but a lot of times the publisher will nominate you. So they'll cover the cost in because it's a prestigious thing for the publishers if their authors get these awards. It was my first book. It was on soul food. I got so much haterade from people about writing about the history of soul food. So many people, especially African Americans, thought it was not a topic worth a scholarly treatment. So I went into that just thinking, hoping that people would buy the book and dig it. So when I got nominated, that was a huge thrill. I was happy to do it, had no expectations, and I know that I could carry that around the rest of my life, just saying I was a nominee. And so when I was at the ceremony, I had practiced two things. I had practiced my acceptance speech and then my fake smile, clapping. Oh, I'm so happy that you won instead of me. Look. And so when they called my name, I was like, wow, I still remember that moment. It's just surreal.
Yeah, I can imagine because it is all the work that you put into it. And I can't even imagine someone would say how we have not contributed to the American cuisine. Between them food and music, that is America.
You're absolutely right. But for some reason, there's a stigma placed on food. Just like African American contributions to the American diet, people just say it's slave food. But they don't say that about music because there are definitely enslaved influences on our music. It's that, but they don't with food.
The majority of the population of this country does not really understand our history and been taught our history. So therefore, they don't understand the contributions of all cultures.
Right.
You're doing us justice by keeping it alive and well.
Yeah. But I just want to emphasize that most of the criticism actually came from African Americans.
I thought so.
So it's fascinating to me why there's this different feeling about food. But, and I tell people this all the time, if you look at aspects of Black culture, the way we talk, dress, dance, entertain, play sports, everything has gone global except our food.
Hmm.
And when our food goes global, it's not associated with us. There are people in the Middle East eating Nashville hot chicken, and they have no idea that that comes from a Black restaurant in Nashville.
Well, You're right, because I'm a global traveler, and there's never been one country that I've been in, and I've been on every continent, that I did not eat something that I could identify with my legacy.
Barbecue is huge. They have no idea that Native Americans and Black people are so influential in shaping that because they're just seeing white guys as the face of barbecue. So I'm doing my work in the United States, but I just want you to know I'm trying to figure out a way to go global with this message because it's just, I just don't know why our food and the contributions and our contributions have been significant and magnificent. They're just not beloved. I think one of the reasons is our cultural tastemakers don't talk about food. When you think about movie stars, athletes, and entertainers, unlike maybe 50 years ago, very few of them talk about Black food openly. They're
Mm.
usually, when they talk about food, it's usually the food of aspiration. So they're talking about steak, they're talking about high-end wine and liqueurs, right? Courvoisier and things like that. They're not talking about the back in the day greens and fried chicken and things like that. So I just think we need more basically cheerleaders for our
Right,
food.
that's true. Well, I love cooking it for sure. And I think our food is one of the main cuisines that actually really pairs well with wine because we have so many different variations of taste, spices. The heat really goes really well with wine. So let's talk about barbecue. Expert on barbecue. So what does that actually mean?
So it's self-proclaimed, of course. So it means eating a lot. So I probably went to 200 barbecue restaurants across the country and thoroughly enjoyed that. If I could eat barbecue every day without any health consequences, I definitely would. It's my favorite food by far. So one of the things is just learning the history. And learning the history was tricky because the early history of barbecue is not very well documented. Actually, most food history of the 1500s and 1600s is not well documented, but it was just a different vibe. So finding out this history that's hazy was a challenge. And then the other thing is just the eating of it. So I actually have become certified as a barbecue judge in two societies, the Kansas City Barbecue Society and then the Memphis in May Association, which are two very big competitive barbecues. Really, it's eating more and more, refining my palate. That's the only way that I'm going to get barbecue supremacy. I am actually later this year going to pursue something called a PhB, a philosopher of barbecue. That is something granted by the Kansas City Barbecue Society. So I hope to get that later this year.
You're gonna be a doctor of barbecue.
Yeah.
That'll be cool.
Yeah, I gotta tell you, being a certified barbecue judge is the best conversation starter I ever had. People are like, oh, you worked in the White House? Okay. But yeah, you're a barbecue judge? I want to talk to you about that.
Okay, with or without sauce?
With.
Ah!
Yeah, I'm tired of this whole no sauce thing. I mean, look, it's up to you. And I understand people talking about, oh, if you have sauce, you're hiding something. I would just say, I'm going to go out on a limb. I think most African Americans would say that the sauce is actually what the signature is of the barbecue cook, because there's an assumption that you know how to make the meat and that is going to be good. So the sauce, just like a chef, right? When you have a composed dish, everybody talks about there has to be a sauce to unify that. So I don't know
Right.
why we let this criticism of sauce just proliferate in the barbecue world. And a lot of this is, I think, for two reasons. One is the influence of fine dining chefs who are rewriting the rules of barbecue. And then the second is the ascendancy of Central Texas barbecue, which traditionally has not had a sauce. For those two
Oh,
reasons, I think that's why the no sauce thing is out there.
okay. I can understand the fine dining chefs because they don't want the messy. But I didn't know about the Texas piece. That's the new one on me.
Central Texas,
Okay,
yes,
yeah.
because there's
Oh,
multiple traditions within Texas.
so I have a real love and hate of sauce, only because there's so many different ones. So
Hmm.
sometimes I'm afraid to let them put it on, or I'm afraid to order it because I'm not sure it's going to be the one I like. And then other times I have had barbecue without sauce that they should have put sauce on it because it wasn't it.
Yeah. See,
So
I think the other thing is the barbecue that people are saying should not be sauced is actually not traditional barbecue because it's smoked meat,
Okay.
which is not cooked directly over the heat source. So it's a different way of cooking. And that's where you hear a lot of the no sauce because the meat's, is permeated with a nice perfume of smoke and things like that.
Okay.
So yeah, but I'm pro sauce. I've been to restaurants where I got my barbecue and basically the plate was an ocean of sauce with little islands of meat poking through. That's how
Yeah.
important the sauce was.
All right. I'm gonna have to be a little bit more dangerous with my sauces. Okay, so it is a wine and food podcast. Do you like wine?
I do like wine.
Okay. So what are your go-tos for barbecue, depending on the sauce? Because you're supposed to pair your wine with the sauce, right?
Yeah, so I don't really drink wine with barbecue. I
Okay.
do it with some soul food stuff, but I just don't really do it with barbecue. To me, barbecue calls for a red drink, you know.
The red drink from Juneteenth, red drink type red drink.
Yeah, so red Kool-Aid, red punch, big big
Oh,
red soda.
you a Kool-Aid guy? Oh
Of
my.
course.
All right,
Love.
did you grow up in Denver?
Yes,
Okay, all right. So I just kind of like, I wouldn't have thought a Denver guy was a Kool-Aid guy, but you never know.
most deaf.
Okay,
Love Kool-Aid.
okay, all right. So we're gonna wrap up. So we talked about the wine and food pairing. Is there a wine and food pairing you do love?
Fried chicken and champagne
Gotcha.
or a very, very dry Chardonnay.
Okay, all right, sounds good. All right, so where are you off to next? Where can people find you?
My next trip is I'm going to be in Chicago, Illinois on June 11th. So if you're there, I'm going to be doing a talk about my latest book on Asian heritage presidential chefs at Bookseller. It's a bookstore there. You can go to my website and find these things. 2 days later, on my birthday, I'll be there for the James Beard Awards. So we'll see if my name gets called on my birthday. And then after that, on June 18th, I'll be in Charlotte doing presentations on Juneteenth with law firms. I'll be in DC for a Juneteenth presentation at the Smithsonian and the Anacostia Museum. And then I go to New York and upstate New York in the Franklin Delano Roosevelt Presidential Library. I'll be talking about my presidential book.
Okay. All right. So tell the audience your website. Is it just adrianmiller.com? Soulfoodscholar.com. All right. I'll put that in the show notes too so that everybody can find you. Okay. When you come to the vineyard?
I've never been to the vineyard. I would like to come.
All right. We'll have to figure out how to get you here and we'll do a wine and food pairing dinner. You'll have to pick the recipes out of the books and see what we can come up with.
Okay. Yeah.
All right.
I'm
Well,
just curious. Just
Yeah.
curious. I know you're supposed to ask the questions, but I do have one for you.
Oh,
Do
no,
you,
you can ask the questions.
yeah, do you pair wine with barbecue?
Yes.
Okay, so what would you do with a pork spare rib with basically a Kansas City sauce? So like a
Oh, well,
sweet.
you're gonna have to explain to me what the taste buds are around the Kansas City sauce, because that's the only way I'm gonna know how to pair it.
So tomato with molasses and some brown sugar. So it's definitely sweet, but it's going to be tomato. There might be a little bit of vinegar in there, but it's not going to be tangy like what you would see in other places. So it's a sweet sauce. And then you're going to have smoked meat. So you're going to have usually charcoal.
Okay. So in that case, I'm gonna go with probably the heaviest, sweetest Riesling I can find. Because I'm thinking about I got to match up to the sweetness in the sauce, but I don't want it to turn vinegary or too sour. And usually something really, really sweet like a heavy Riesling or a Gewürztraminer would usually probably hold up. If I was doing a red, I would probably have to do a port because I could do a port with a real sweet sauce. So either one of those would probably work.
Okay. I was just curious.
Yeah, no, that's fine. Testing my parents' skills.
Mm-hmm. On the
Yeah,
spot.
on the spot. Well, Adrian, it's been amazing to talk to you. I could talk to you for hours because there's so much behind all the things that you've done. And I'm sure there are so many things you left out of all these books because there's just no way you can get everything into a book that you want to share and have people remember it and go back to it. So that obviously gives you the opportunity to write your next book. And
Yep.
that you have done so much research. I can see why you have gotten your awards for your research, because you pulled out some things that just during our few minutes together that I'm sure didn't end up in the book, but it's food for how you actually themed out and created what actually ended up in those wonderful books that you have. Thank you so much for your time and all you're doing to bring our history to life through food. And hopefully, I'll see you on Island soon.
All right. Sounds good. Thank you again for inviting me on your podcast.
You're very welcome.